creating cost evidence through research. We do that both with really large scale projects funded by USAID as well as smaller pilot projects, promoting best practices, developing tools and training, and we'll do that both open source sort of broad training and tools, as well as more bespoke, very sort of like specialized training and tools for specific organizations, and then fostering collaboration through meetings like this. So as part of our work with CTI, we have developed a costing community of practice. And our goal with that is to create a forum of like-minded individuals that are interested in cost analysis and bringing it to the forefront of development economics. We have quite a few members at this point, and through this organization, we like to create events like the Round Bag Lunch, as well as other sorts of costing related activities. We try to have these BBLs once every other month. So this is your first one. We hope to see you in future ones as well. Today we have Emily from the Brookings Institute coming to talk to us about a costing tool they're using called the Childhood Cost Calculator. This has been something they've been working on for several years now, and I think was launched not that long ago. So with that, I'll pass it off to Emily to tell us a little bit more about the tool, and we'll save 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, I should be sharing. You all see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much to SIGA for the invitation. It's great to be here with you all, and excited to be with spending some time with other people who feel excited and passionate about costing. So as Kevin mentioned, today I'll share about the Childhood Cost Calculator, which we launched in June. But before I get into the tool, I'll talk a little bit about our motivation for this work and our journey. But I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank, in addition to SIGA for inviting us to this BBL today, also thank our partners, RTI International, who worked with us on the development of this cost calculator, as well as to the teams in the 3 pilot countries with whom we worked to pilot the tool. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to get where we are with the tool, and really appreciate their feedback and input. And also want to thank the BHP Foundation, who has supported this work on costing. So I would imagine that you all would agree with me that today's children and youth really are going to determine the future of our planet. And we believe that for young people to develop and thrive, sound investments must be made across multiple sectors, including health, nutrition, social protection, and education. Unfortunately, there are a number of sobering statistics that you can see here related to children and youth, such as, for example, that currently globally, or in low and middle income countries, 70% of 10-year-olds are unable to read and comprehend basic text. So that's the definition of learning poverty. Nearly a quarter of children under 5 around the world are stunted, which is a strong correlate of success later in life. 25 million children were or under vaccinated in 2021. About a quarter of youth around the world are not engaged in education, employment, or any form of training. And finally, after the pandemic, up to an additional 10 million girls were at risk of early marriage. So so to address these crises, we really there's really a need for governments and donors and implementers to have a clear understanding of what it costs and the cost breakdowns in order to make decisions around financing. So cost data are, of course, not the only type of information that's needed, but unfortunately, cost data are often neglected. So why are cost data so critical? And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but just to think a little bit more about why we need cost data. So we need cost data for advocating for investment, for setting priorities, for budgeting and planning, for managing program activities, and also for accountability of spending. And then we need cost data related to all of those questions. We need cost data for conducting cost efficiency analysis, cost benefit analysis, cost effectiveness analysis. So often, a lot of emphasis is put on those different types of cost analysis, but little attention is paid to the cost piece. So there's been a large movement around impact evaluations, for example, and cost data tend to sort of be left behind. So as I said, I'm going to share a little bit about our journey around costing, and we share this because I think that it's important to sort of acknowledge the complexity around costing and the challenges around doing costing work, and sort of want to share, how we've learned and grown in our own costing journey and over the past decade. So in 2014, we established a work program, a multi-tiered work program at Brookings, at the Center for Universal Education, that was aimed to address several of the constraints to achieving high quality and equitable early childhood development programming at scale across the globe. So I was co-leading that with my colleague Tamar Manwelian-Atinch. And one of the pillars that we identified a need for was around cost data. So we really noted that there was a lack of cost data. We had the idea of costing a basic benefit package in every country for to see if you were to provide this basic benefit package to every child in X country, what would that cost? And we learned very quickly that there's very little data on actual data on cost, what it costs to deliver those different types of services. And so we really wanted to understand what the barriers were around costing, and did research around that, and identified that there were clearly barriers on both the supply and the demand sides. So on the supply side, really insufficient underlying data, poor availability and/or access to tools to collect and analyze data, and also a number of methodological complexities around costing. And then on the demand side, low prioritization of costing, perhaps some aversion to transparency, and also heterogeneous capacity and needs around costing. So in 2015, through the support of a high-level working group on costing, which included representatives from the World Bank and the IDB, JPAL, IFPRI, a number of individuals who were working on this topic, we opted to design our own costing tool, our cost calculator, since we identified the need for a tool that provided some consistency, that also could be used across different sectors within early childhood. So we had identified some tools that were for example, early childhood education only, and were less comprehensive. And so we wanted a tool that could be used for integrated programs or programs across different sectors in the early childhood space. And so we developed what we named the Standardized ECD Costing Tool, or SECT. And this was an Excel-based tool that looked like this. Here's a snapshot of what it looked like. It had multiple tabs. So it was, an Excel workbook with multiple tabs and built-in functionalities, including, for example, currency conversions, PPP conversions, amortization built in. And using that tool, you're able to calculate, the unit costs and total costs, but also the distribution across different activities and items. And we piloted that tool in partnership with the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund at the World Bank in 5 different countries across different types of early childhood programs. So you can see we piloted in Mexico and Bangladesh, Mozambique, Malawi, and Mali. And after conducting these pilots, we learned a lot. We learned, first of all, that there was a huge need. So these partners that we were working with, which included implementing partners and governments as well as researchers, really were lacking a kind of a tool that they could use for costing. We learned that the tool contained kind of the right elements in terms of thinking about the methodology around costing and the complexities of costing. We felt like we had done a good job at getting, as good as we could, to as close as we could to a really strong costing tool without it being perfect. Because if you've done costing, I think you would agree that it's impossible to get it perfectly. But we also discovered that that the tool was a bit complex, and that the Excel workbook was a little bit overwhelming. And for individuals who hadn't done costing work or weren't necessarily economists, it was challenging, and it required a lot of work on our side, working together with these partners. Something that we, in addition to perhaps not wanting to be doing this for the rest of my life, I suppose, I also really felt that it was important that that the capacity around costing really sit in the countries where this work is being done, where the costing is being done. And so we sort of went back to the drawing board and thinking about the costing work and the costing tool. Also during this time, we were starting to receive a lot of requests. We received a lot of requests for the tool, but also for use in early childhood development. But we were also receiving a lot of requests around costing and education more broadly. And so we sort of published our learnings from that process, a number of pieces around costing, which are all available, the first 3 on the Brookings website, and also a piece in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences around the costing tool and the costing work that we had done. And then we moved into our next phase of work. So we went back to our supply and demand side constraints and did a lot of thinking about the tool itself and the extent to which it could be used, but also another piece that was that we noted that was really important, which was around the demand side. So in this next phase of work, we decided that we needed sort of a two-pillared approach. One was building a movement around costing to really help to increase the demand for cost data and costing, and then also working on refining the cost calculator to make it more user-friendly. So on the first piece, in terms of this kind of costing movement, we established in partnership with the Early Childhood Development Action Network, or ECDAN, what we call the Global Education and ECD Costing Consortium, or GEEC. We like to joke that we're the geeks who work on costing. And we established sort of a problem statement and a mission of what we would do together. And this included academics and as well as representatives from some of the institutions that I named before, as well as UNICEF and UNESCO, thinking about how we could work together to really build this movement around costing. So together, we established a set of activities that we would engage in, including doing a survey and landscape analysis of existing costing tools and initiatives, and then a matrix mapping of the functions, purpose, and limitations of these different costing tools. And then finally, a bank of publicly accessible tools and resources for the global education and ECD communities, including establishment of terms of reference, theories of change around costing. And then the second piece, the second pillar was, as I said, kind of going back to the drawing board with our cost calculator and thinking about how we could establish or refine the tool such that it would be more user-friendly. And this, the beginning of this really came from a conversation in the halls of a conference around education technology. And that was a conversation with Carmen Striegel from RTI International. And so building on SECT, we decided to build the tool on what's called the Tangerine platform. That some of you might be familiar with Tangerine. It's a platform that's used primarily for assessments. So the early grade reading assessment and the early grade math assessments that was built by the RTI team. And so the idea was to build this, like I said, this tool that was more user-friendly. And you'll see in a minute that it's the tool is form-based and sort of survey-based that walks the user through through these forms page by page in a really simple way. So we built the tool, like I said, on this. It's for use across child and youth-focused sectors, including different integrated programs. I'll show you in a minute across the different sectors and different services. So we went beyond just early childhood to include programs across programming across children and youth. As the previous tool, it also has these built-in functionalities such as currency conversion, amortization, and it can be used by anybody, by policymakers, funders, implementers, researchers. And then for those that choose to contribute aggregate data, they can choose to contribute the data to a database of costs for programming for children and youth called the Cost Data Explorer. And the data are all housed on a secure server. And as I mentioned, it's the individuals or organizations that participate have the option to opt in to share the aggregate data. So these are some screenshots of what the tool looks like. As I said, it's built on the Tangerine platform and is essentially survey-based with a series of questions and a built-in skip logic. It's structured such that each cost category is a separate form, which you can see here. And it includes features like a summary box and some totals to help track the individual doing the costing through their progress, and also guide through a number of prompts. We collect data, or the user is asked to enter the details around frequency, dosage, context, beneficiary type, which also helps to provide more context and information for the Cost Data Explorer database, so that when individuals are looking up the cost data, they can understand, clearly not every early childhood education program or teacher training program looks the same. It's really important to understand the variation in these different types of interventions, and particularly around frequency and dosage and setting, et cetera. So as I mentioned, it can be used across a number of sectors and different types of interventions. These can all be selected in the data entry process. However, these aren't these categories don't limit the type of intervention per se, but they're used for tagging the interventions for the database, which once we have more data will be a searchable database. So you could search by intervention type, by sector, country, et cetera. So to understand better how resources are allocated, the structure of the tool is designed so that the program costs are broadly divided into overhead costs and direct intervention costs. The overhead costs include 4 categories: program design, indirect program management, program evaluation, and other overhead costs. And then the direct cost category includes training, direct delivery, direct program management, transfers individuals and families, and other direct costs that might not be captured under that. Since it can be sort of the boundaries between these different cost categories can be potentially be a bit blurred, and understanding that costing and finance terminology isn't always necessarily widely agreed upon across different programs and interventions. We have an accompanying guidance document that can be found on the website with the tool. And Elise Painter from my team, I can't see because since I'm speaking, but she can put the link to access the tool in the chat box. So within each cost category, there are 6 possible resource types. So labor and personnel, buildings, land and infrastructure, materials or supplies or equipment, facilities rental, and travel, accommodation, and transportation, and then another category. Again, the guidance document provides detailed information about how to identify these different resource types. In addition, we have cost classification that separates out investment versus recurrent costs. So, of course, really important to understand which costs may occur only once or maybe even twice in an intervention period or a program period. For example, you wouldn't want to be including the cost of a building, like a school building being built every year of the program, because that would make it look very expensive and doesn't make sense. So as I said, we have the amortization built in, and this is a really important component to break down between recurrent and investment. So that there's a simple question: is this recurrent or investment cost? If it's chosen to be investment, then that then asks about the prompts for questions around their amortization. And then an additional cost classification is paid versus imputed or donated. So we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration all of the different cost categories, even if they have been donated. If this program were to be replicated or scaled, et cetera, we need to understand what all goes into the intervention. And again, this is simply asked in this form. And then a neat thing about Tangerine is that not only does it produce a CSV file at the end after all of the data are inputted, but it also produces these automatic data visualizations, which are nice. So these simple pie charts, so by cost category, by resource type, by recurrent versus investment. We also have for paid versus donated. And of course, the total cost and the cost per unit, average cost per year. And these can also be shown in the currency can be selected as well as real versus nominal terms. So what are the types of questions that C3 can answer? So as part of our work, we don't want to just sort of provide this tool. We also think that it's really important to be thinking about sort of, what's the purpose of costing, and different organizations, entities, individuals may have different reasons for doing their costing work. And so for example, when we did our pilots, we worked really closely with the teams and for them to think about, what were the types of costing questions they were interested in asking, and how that served them in terms of scaling, in terms of identifying elements, the cost drivers, et cetera. So here are some of the types of questions. What resources are needed? What are the cost drivers? What's the cost per beneficiary? How are these costs distributed between investment versus recurrent, et cetera. And then there are some additional questions that C3 can assist in answering, but you need additional data to be able to do so. So for cost effectiveness analysis, you need to know, obviously, you need to have data around you need to have impact evaluation data or data around effectiveness. And then for cost benefit analysis, you also need data on the monetary value of the benefits that are created by a given intervention. So again, as I mentioned before, the cost data is super important, but needed for these other types of cost analysis, which also require other types of data. As I mentioned, the costing tool and the guidance resources can be found on this website that I think Elise has put into the chat. And as I mentioned, the Cost Data Explorer will be an interactive database. Currently, we have the pilots, the costing pilots there with their data and information about those interventions, which were in Ghana and Honduras and Cambodia. 2 teacher training and 1 early childhood development intervention. And so we'll be, once we have more data, we'll be building out this Cost Data Explorer, like I said, with the searchable database and these case studies with visualizations of the aggregate data, again, for only if the costing teams agree to share their data. So that's where we are now. As I said, we launched the tool in June, and now we're thinking a little bit about our vision for phase 3. And so we thought we would share that with you as well. Really continuing to attempt to address both the demand and supply side constraints around costing through 3 different pillars. So the first is the continued dissemination of the Childhood Cost Calculator, C3. As I said, it's free, available on the website. We are looking to translate the tool and guidance documents into major languages, including Spanish, French, and Arabic in the future. We're also working to continue to improve the tool. So we think the tool is really strong and will be incredibly effective and useful as it is, but also technology is moving fast. So we've been having conversations also with the RTI team, thinking about how to bring in AI, of course, thinking about how to upload data automatically through from a CSV file, Excel file, straight into the cost calculator, using AI to identify words to categorize the different items into cost categories and resource types, for example. So that's exciting. And then and that will include, so just the continued use of the tool will include both anybody can use it, as I mentioned, but also we're partnering with some organizations and working with them to provide some support, but also as part of the process of continuing to learn and improve the tool. And then second, we plan to work with teams on the ground in universities and or think tanks, and really to establish some kind of hubs around costing and financing. We also do a lot of work around financing and innovative financing, so really linking those two. So this isn't just just costing for costing's sake or just for academic purposes, really thinking about how cost links to financing and financial modeling, et cetera. And so we're in conversation with a number of organizations around that. And then finally, the establishment of a global costing task force. So this would be a shift from our GEEK into something much larger, where we're working with a number of entities around the globe, thinking about how to continue to sort of drive this costing movement. So in order to increase the amount and use of high quality cost data in education and early childhood development for programming around children and youth. So I will pause there and we can jump into Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emily. For those of us on the call, I think it's a small enough group that, if you want to ask a question, we can either, go ahead in the chat or just feel free to unmute yourself and and ask your question. Since I'm unmuted, I might just take a chance to ask mine. I guess, what do you see as being like the biggest impediments to getting people to take up the tool?
So I think, I mean, like I said earlier, I think that there's sort of this tension between like, we know we need to do costing and this is really important, and oh, this is scary, and do we really want to put all of our data out there? I think that there's not at present, I think that there's still not a lot of support from, so if we're talking about primarily we work in low middle income countries, but we've also had requests for the tool in the United States, but perhaps funders, donors really not supporting cost work, and so so kind of simple kind of back of the envelope calculations of costs are being done, as opposed to in higher quality costing. Like I said, I think we're looking at the option of making facilitating the direct upload of data. So I think there's also there's a bit of a trade-off between the Excel format, which is a little bit, which is overwhelming and very kind of, like requires the ability to use Excel, et cetera. And then the forms, which is, which is an entering by hand, all of the cost data. We also sort of think this is, and actually would really welcome a conversation around this, is that having to go through that process is also important in that it makes you think about what all of the different cost elements are, like, having to, and not kind of having it too automated, right? So that's something we've been thinking about, like, there's the, you can make it really easy, but you want to make it too easy so that people aren't actually thinking about what all of those different cost categories and resource types are. So anyway, so those are, I would say, some of the things.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Looks like now we're starting to get some in the chat.
Great.
Yeah, so Lucy and Lee asks how we can get involved in the Global Costing Task Force, and thanks you for an exciting presentation.
Great, thank you. Do people who've put their questions in the chat actually just want to come on and ask them so we can have a conversation? If you feel comfortable. Lonnie?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my question was,
Can you introduce you and or yourself and say where you're from? That's really, it'd be interesting to hear.
oh, sure. Lani Trinuth, I'm an independent consultant, and I'm also working with Kevin and Liz at SIGA.
Great.
Yeah, so my question is, looking at the two different main approaches to costing, so bottom-up ingredients-based approach versus the top-down program experience approach. And it seems that that this tool takes like you build the costing from the bottom up by identifying the resources and putting the costs in that way. And I was wondering if there's been any attempt yet to compare how that approach to costing might yield different results versus one that uses the top-down approach. And so thinking specifically about how you mentioned at the end, in this third phase, looking at trying to work in an importation facility by bringing in a CSV file. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we haven't done that. So as I mentioned, we just launched the tool in June, and before that we did the 3 pilots. And so with those programs, we were, for 2 of them that were teacher trainings, they were looking at costing different modalities of teacher training. And so that was very much a bottom-up approach, and we haven't done a direct comparison. But I think that that's interesting to think about. And this question also just made me think about that, the costing can be done using the tool both retrospectively, but also prospectively. It's flexible enough that it can be tailored to sort of the individual organization's costing needs. That we hope that is, that's also an option. Which would be important to indicate in the cost database, also the difference between those. Yeah, is that helpful, Lonnie? Great.
Yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
But as of yet, with the application of the tool, there hasn't been an opportunity to do a comparison of what the results are using
Correct.
those two different
Correct. Sorry if I didn't answer that clearly. Correct. That's right.
Because I think sort of globally that's a really interesting question, because there's those different approaches require different levels of so the costing analyst resources, and that's something that has really been an interest for me to know which of the approaches have the results look differently from those results, or from those different approaches, if even they do. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion and something to think about more for sure. Thank you. There's a question from Shri Gautam. Would you like to jump in?
Sure, just we are evaluating different humanitarian projects implemented by USAID. And I was just wondering how useful are these tools for short-term humanitarian projects where the indicators are mostly focused on food security, resilience, and how I just wanted to learn about their usefulness to these short-term programs versus long-term development interventions.
Sure, I think that's a good question. So I guess there's two pieces to this. One, does the C3, would the C3 fit for something that's shorter term? And I would say the answer is yes. The second piece is sort of, are the interventions appropriate, or could they be found in the C3 tool? And I guess I would need to know more about the interventions themselves related to security and food security and resilience, and to know if we have those intervention types. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter for the costing itself. It's those, as I mentioned, are tags for our database, but primarily, so I would say that the cost categories and the resource types are fairly sector and intervention agnostic, but there might be elements of a humanitarian project that might be missed, just because that's not been our focus. But happy to continue that conversation offline if you're interested.
Thank you.
There's a question or a few questions from Jane.
Yeah, hi, Emily. So my name is Jane. I'm a senior research associate with 3IE. And sorry for all the questions, but I'll pick and choose. So the first one, really exciting to hear that you're building a data hub of cost evidence. I think that's just amazing to give folks the opportunity to compare costs of similar programs that target similar outcomes. I'm just curious, so far in your experiences with the pilots, have your partners been willing to share data, and what kinds of considerations have you had to document in guidance materials or otherwise to convince folks to share data with you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, so all three of the pilots were willing to share their data. That was kind of a requirement because we needed to publish that for our funders. So from the start, they agreed to do so, but also, they were using these in projects of their own, and were looking to, looking to, build evidence around costs and thinking about decision making for the future scale up of these programs. So, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, one, like I said, the data are the disaggregated data. We don't even have access to the disaggregated data, right? So the data, the costing is done on the C3 on the platform, and those data, and only the individual doing the costing has access to those data. So I think that is, first of all, provides a level of sort of comfort and security around the disaggregated data. As far as the aggregated data, I think we don't really know yet. So we have had a number of teams access the tool since its launch in June, and they have an option to tick yes, no, or ask more questions. And so we have had them come to us and ask more questions, and we don't know yet if they are willing to publish. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like we really hope that that the teams will be willing to share. We hope it works. We hope our plan to get more data out there works, and we'll see. Did you want to ask your last question, Jane?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks. I didn't want to hog the floor, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
thanks. That's super interesting, and we'll be looking forward to an update, maybe this time next year on how it's going and whether you're getting lots of data. Relatedly, so once users input data into the tool, and I'm sure I can figure this out myself if I explore a little bit, but is there like an interface for analyzing like heterogeneity across different activities or types of cost ingredients? You mentioned that the tool can be used to answer questions around scale up decisions. Is there any sort of like interface for analysis or modeling that's included in part of the tool, or will the user export the data and then work with a cost specialist or cost analyst on conducting that kind of analysis?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, so there are certainly ways of doing that in the tool. Sort of, yeah, it's possible to do that within the tool in terms of thinking about both sort of the number of beneficiaries and the amortization piece are critical components of that, right? But there's not like a separate, like specific way of modeling that within this around scaling, and so that's something that we're working on and thinking about together with one partner that we're working with, and might come into play in terms of the sort of the AI piece. So we'll keep you posted. Like I said, I guess I haven't said it yet today, but I feel like this is sort of the cost calculator now is like is a really good like brand new Subaru. It's not a Rolls-Royce. I don't know if we'll ever get to the Rolls-Royce, but maybe we'll get to I don't know, Alexis at some point. But like I said, I feel like we really, I think, try to be humble in this and acknowledge sort of what the limitations are and all of the different complexities around costing. And so, yeah, so we'll continue to improve the tool and see, you know, what else we can kind of build into it as we go along. Yeah. And also we will be adding a sort of like a cost effectiveness calculator as well. It's another element that's going to come. Lonnie, are you thanks for your question around the landscape analysis. So Para 11 was part of our GEEC, the Global Education ECD Costing Consortium, and shared with us the SEAMS work. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and just was looking at or wondering what variety of tools were included in your costing tool review, but at least pointed me to a good report there. So I think that answers it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and we hope to continue to sort of get with the Global Costing Task Force, we hope to continue to get these resources out there and more available. You know, as well as just a better understanding of how these different tools compare. Yeah, it's so important because I think that different tools are fit for different types of different purposes, and so helpful to understand kind of what's a good fit. Another thing I thought about was that in addition to this, to the childhood cost calculator, we also will have a piece published in the Lancet soon, together with a number of other authors, focusing on the next 1,000 days of early childhood development, so early childhood education, in which we conduct conduct simulations of cost per child for the provision of universal early childhood education for 1, 2, and 3 years. So for 3, 3, and 4, and 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So that's a different type of costing, not micro costing, but a simulation. And so if anybody's interested in that, please reach out. We hope that comes out soon.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Emily. This is super interesting, and it's great to see sort of what else is happening out in the costing space. I know some people logged in a little bit late. We will be posting a recording of this session on the event page, and we'll send that out to you guys that joined later on today. If you have any other questions, is there anywhere that they should reach out to you, Emily?
Absolutely. Elise can put our project email in there. childhoodcostdata@brookings.edu. Or feel free to reach out to me directly. Also on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc. So definitely reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. Yeah, so the report on the C3U was published, and that's in the link above. And then as we're working with partners and as other cost exercises are done, you'll see more cost data, and hopefully soon in the interactive format. So yeah, we'd love to hear more also from all of you who've joined this call, what you're doing in costing, and if anybody's interested in joining the Global Costing Task Force, definitely let us know. And yeah, happy to talk to other people who are excited and interested in costing. So.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who joined today. And I hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.